If you're not directly in the real estate industry, you may not have been following a recent lawsuit regarding real estate commissions. So I'm going to tell you all about it coming up next. Hey, what's happening, friends? There was recently a verdict on a real estate commissions lawsuit that basically said that big real estate companies and the National Association of Realtors conspired to force sellers to pay buyer agent commissions, and that shouldn't have happened. And they have a verdict which is pretty large, like $5 billion, that should be paid back to sellers that are part of this class action lawsuit. And so I'm not going to go through all the legal details of this, but I'm going to talk about some inside baseball on how the real estate industry works and how it affects you as a buyer or a seller, because there's a lot of talk about how it affects the industry. That's fine. We're going to debate that for a while. But really, sellers and buyers should understand, if the way commissions change in the future, how does it affect you personally? So I'm going to go through that first on the sell side. And the first thing to understand is that commissions have always been negotiable, right? When you have a listing appointment with a realtor and you talk about commissions, you have that discussion about what the commission is going to be, and it's always been a negotiable thing. It isn't like there's a rule in the industry. There's a standard that a lot of times people abide by, 5 or 6%, but there's no rule, and a lot of times you do see commissions that are lower than that. There's a lot of flat or reduced service brokers that will do it for less, maybe even a flat fee. That's your choice as a seller to choose what kind of service you want to get, because the rule usually is in life and business, right? You get what you pay for. And so a lot of people do elect to go with a full service brokerage that charges a 5 or 6% commission. The thing that has to be understood about that, which I think was missed in this, is that commission is usually shared. When you agree to that commission with a listing broker, that commission is usually shared with the brokerage that brings the buyer and actually purchase your home. And in most cases, customarily, it's half. So if you do a 6% commission, that listing brokerage is going to offer 3% of that listing commission to go to the buyer's agent or the buyer's brokerage to incentivize and compensate them for bringing a buyer. And this is definitely beneficial to a seller. Like, yes, the seller is paying that commission, it's being shared, but it's beneficial to the seller because you have to think of it as a marketing cost, right? So when you agree to list your property with a selling broker and they say they're going to take professional photography and they're going to do online advertising and some print advertising, maybe some staging, maybe pay for some cleanup and some landscaping before it goes on the market to better market your property, they also put some of that money towards incentivizing buyers agents to bring their qualified buyers to look at your home and submit offers. And in some cases, when there's multiple buyers who are interested in your property, they're going to fight against each other and get you the best possible price and terms for your home. So one way to think about it is it's a cost of marketing, right? That listing brokerage, who is entitled to keep that entire 5 or 6% or 4% or whatever they agree to with the seller, they're incentivized to put that into the marketplace and incentivize buyers agents to bring their qualified buyers to see that property and get you the best terms and price possible on your home. So that's a big benefit to the seller, right? Is that listing brokerage is sharing some of that commission to get you the most qualified and most motivated buyers. And if you don't do that, one of the potential outcomes of this lawsuit is that people are going to say, well, I'm no longer going to be able to share my commission, so I'm only going to negotiate my seller side commission with the seller, and then buyers are going to have to figure it out on their own. And the reality is that's going to change the dynamic of the marketability of your property, because if you think about it, if you're selling your home for, say, $800,000 and you're only going to pay your listing broker, you're not going to allow them to share any of the commission with a buyer's brokerage. Now, if a buyer wants representation, they are going to have to negotiate with an agent and pay that agent directly out of pocket in order to represent them in the purchase of that property. And in effect, what that does is it's going to increase the cost of buying your home. So if there's 3 homes on the market that are very comparable, they're all $800,000, and 2 of them are offering some compensation to the buyer's agent for bringing a buyer, it costs that buyer no more money to purchase that home, where if your home is $800,000 and you are not offering a buyer's commission on your property, that's going to cost that buyer potentially $20,000, $24,000 extra to buy your property. So now you're at a disadvantage. If the marketplace says all 3 homes are worth $800,000, yours is actually going to cost $820,000+ because the buyer is going to have to come out of pocket for representation, and it is going to limit the marketability of your property because buyers may not want to purchase a property. It's going to cost them more when they could get a very comparable one for less because they don't have to come out of pocket for their buyer's agent commission. And so that leads us to the buyer side and how the buyer is affected, right? So the seller, there's some marketability issues there. One more thing on the sell side, which I should note, is that one of the things that is beneficial to a seller is when a buyer is represented and they have a professional on their side helping them negotiate that deal, helping them through the contracts, helping them on all the performance deadlines in the transaction. It makes the entire process a lot smoother, where if you're a seller, and now that leads us to the buyer effects of this, if you're a seller and you say, you know what, I'm not going to pay a buyer's agent, they're going to have to figure it out on their own. Some buyers are going to be limited in their ability to pay financially for representation, and so now they may have to go into that transaction unrepresented, and that does a couple of different things, right? The first one is it puts them at a significant disadvantage because they are not a professional. They don't understand the contracts, they don't understand the timelines and all of the requirements that they're going to have to meet in order to get that transaction to closing, and so they're going to be at a significant disadvantage from a negotiation standpoint, and it really hurts the consumer, the buyer, not having representation if they cannot afford it. And if you think about who is going to be affected the most, right, it's that lower income spectrum buyer who doesn't have a ton of out-of-pocket money. You know, they may be doing a VA loan or an FHA loan or a USDA loan, which is very low down payment. It limits the amount of money they got to come out of pocket to close. But if then they got to add on an additional 2.5-3% to pay their buyer's agent, they may not have the funds to do that, and they may choose to be unrepresented in the purchase of a property, which has a lot of implications because they are not going to have that professional advice and guidance through the process. So there's some major consumer protection issues here when you have buyers who do not understand what they should be looking for in disclosures. What should they be looking for in doing their due diligence on the property? There's a lot of things that go into what we do that helps protect the buyer to make sure that they are making a sound investment, they're paying a fair price, and they're going to get the best deal possible and be happy after closing. So there's a lot of implications on the buy side that are really going to hurt consumers if for some reason sellers are unable, or we are limited in our ability as a listing brokerage to share some of our commission to incentivize buyers agents to come. And so you got to think about it from both sides. There's some major issues in the sell side from a marketability standpoint and from a standpoint of having a smooth transaction. And on the buy side, it would be terrible to be a buyer and not have the ability to have representation because of your financial constraints, and it's really going to put you at a disadvantage in the long run in that property buying process. And so those are the two big kind of consumer issues that we got to think about when we're talking about a change in the way the industry works. The industry has worked this way for a very long time. It's nothing new. It's just new lawsuits that are currently happening. There's some copycat lawsuits because there's already been one verdict. Of course, attorneys are going to get involved and want to continue to file similar lawsuits to get those types of verdicts and those big money settlements that the first one has already proven is possible. So it's something to think about when you're going through the process. One of the cool things about the industry and how this works now is you have to think about it. We were all a first-time home buyer at some point in our life, and it's a pay-it-forward system right now, right? So when you buy, that commission is usually taken care of by that selling brokerage sharing part of the commission with you, and so you don't have to come out of pocket. But then when you sell, the opposite is true, right? You are going to pay your listing brokerage, and they are going to share some of that commission with a buyer's agent. And so you're just paying it forward, right? You may get the benefit up front, but on the back end, when you sell, that cost is incurred by the seller, and this would change the industry pretty significantly. And when you've been a young first-time home buyer, which I and many people have been, you may not have been in a position to come out of pocket $10, $20, $30,000 for additional expenses to pay for buyer's representation, and it would put you at a significant disadvantage. And so it's a lot to think about. It's a lot of inside baseball, but it's something to be aware of as we go forward. When you have that discussion as a seller or a buyer with your agent, you really want to make sure that you're understanding what the costs are, what the implications are if compensation is or is not offered, because at the end of the day, realtors work on commission, right? We don't get paid unless we are closing transactions and bringing a buyer and seller together to have a happy transaction. So there's going to be some changes potentially. Nothing has happened immediately. This is something that will kind of change over time and develop over time as the industry reacts to this initial lawsuit and the future ones that are coming. But it's important at the end of the day, if you're going to pay for a listing brokerage or if you're going to pay for buyer's representation, you want to make sure that you're paying for the highest and best professional you can possibly get. And then maybe that's one positive outcome of this whole entire discussion, is that consumers will kind of have to elevate their choices in terms of when they select representation and not just go with the first person that they contact on the internet or somebody that their cousin suggested that just got their real estate license. That is gonna be something that if you're coming out of pocket and you understand there's some significant costs, you may evaluate a little bit more. But as always, if you have any questions about this, I'll continue to update you when there's new developments on this and other industry changes. You can always reach out, Dylan@buybigisland.com, or you can book a meeting in the comments below, and I'll be happy to talk to you, and I'll see you guys next week. Aloha.